Awesome. Thank you so much, Adriana. So everyone, I want to thank you so much for being here and joining our conversation. As Adriana mentioned, our session is really going to be centered on reframing commitment. We are in a moment where the way that we use inclusion or the words that we use around inclusion, it's evolving. And we always want to ensure that we remember that the purpose of our work, it remains just as critical. But we want to provide just a good guide for how we can continue to do our work, just understanding where we're at right now. Now, one of the things that I'm really excited about is that we have invited three experts in their own right who have unique perspectives that I believe would help us to have a very full conversation about this topic. And now I'd like to throw it to them to introduce themselves. And I'd like to start with Dr. Monica Parker.
Sure. Thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of this very important panel, and I'm so happy to join all of you today. By profession, I am a family physician. I practiced for more than 30 years, and the last 15 years of my career I spent as a geriatric provider at Wesley Woods Geriatric Center at Emory University. I now lead the Outreach, Recruitment, and Engagement Core for the Goizueta Alzheimer's Disease Research Center, part of the Goizueta Brain Institute at Emory University.
Okay, and to you, Judy.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Thank you for allowing me to be part of this today. I oversee a clinical research site. I've been in the research industry for about 20 years. I'm the executive director and co-owner of Sun Valley Research Center in Imperial, California. And we are located in a large Latino community. Aside from that, I have other things I do in the clinical research industry, co-founder of Save Our Sites, Latinos in Clinical Research.
Awesome. And last but certainly not least, Dr. McMurray.
Hi, thank you so much for having me today. I think it's going to be a great conversation. My name is Michelle McMurray Heath, and I'm a physician scientist by training, pediatrics and immunology, but I've spent most of the last 25 years now, time flies, really working on innovation policy, mostly around DC. So I've worked on Capitol Hill. I was the associate director for science in the Center for Devices at FDA. I then led regulatory and clinical for all the medical device companies of J&J before leading an industry coalition called the Biotechnology Innovation Organization, which is a coalition of 1,000 biotech and pharma companies. And in the last couple of years, I've been focused on a startup that's trying to revolutionize how we do clinical research by trying to get more community involvement into clinical trials.
Awesome. So together, it's my hope that we'll be able to explore how to sustain and strengthen diverse participation in Alzheimer's trials, even when DEI isn't the headline, but remembering that inclusion remains the heartbeat of our work. So let's start by reframing the conversation itself. Now, the term DEI can mean different things to different people. And I'd like to hear from each of you. How are you or your organization reframing or communicating the importance of inclusion within your teams or communities? I want to start with you, Judy.
Yeah, and everything I'm going to speak to is specific to having a research site in a Latino community. We've had our research center for 17 years. So we've always recruited and focused on ensuring that all participants in our community can be involved in a clinical trial, regardless of their background. So all these terms are a lot newer over the past year. And I don't necessarily agree with the terms. It's just, this is where we're at. This is our community, and this is what we should be doing. And we continue to do regardless of of what term exists because it's the right thing to do and because we are bringing these clinical trials to our community, and we want to make sure that information is out there and we give the opportunity for all the patients to participate in clinical trials, which also extends beyond my clinical research into the other initiatives that I'm involved with, Save Our Sites and Latinos in Clinical Research, that we focus on ensuring all patients, regardless of what year it is and what's going on and what terms, they all need to be part of clinical trials, and they should have the information easily accessible. And that's pretty much as simple, I think, as it can get on my end.
Absolutely. All right, with Dr. Parker.
Sure. I think one of the reasons that I got involved with Alzheimer's research in particular was in an academic medical center where I saw most of my patients. One of the things that I observed was that there were a lot of people participating in clinical research that had to do with improving their overall health. So I come at research from a healthcare access position. And in order to participate in current Alzheimer's clinical trials, we're less focused on disease manifestation and more on how can we prevent the disease. We're a little ways away from actually having a definitive cure, but it all is about how can you tell people there are things we've learned through research that prevent this disorder. So for me, the idea is you can't get to clinical research participation without having an introduction to it from your provider. So as a general primary care provider who may not be associated with an academic center that's actively doing research, you may not have access. Most of the people currently participating in many of these clinical trials are part of an academic healthcare network and an academic research place. So a lot of the outreach that I do is to the community that may not be associated with an academic healthcare center. And the barrier to participation for many people in the community is less your ethnicity or your gender identification, but who your provider is and whether or not that provider is aware of the opportunity to participate in clinical trials and what's available. We throw the words clinical trials around like everybody knows what that means, and they don't. All clinical trials aren't necessarily therapeutic. A lot of them are observational in terms of how do we understand aging? How do we understand disease processes? And a lot of that has to do with healthcare access. So from the standpoint of how are you framing inclusion in research primarily depends upon having a healthcare access point and making sure that that healthcare access point is aware of the opportunities to participate in clinical research, whether it's Alzheimer's, cardiovascular disease, or orthopedic diseases.
Absolutely. And Dr. McMurray, do you have anything to add?
Sure. Well, it's interesting being in the startup space because I think we were probably one of the bellwethers of what was coming. And so when our startups really got off the ground, we were focused primarily on just diversifying clinical trials. That was our focus. And we started hearing from investors in September, October that they were getting kind of nervous about the ground shifting under their feet. And that caused us to take a little bit of a pause. Everything in startup world is driven by investors, right? And really back up. But it turned out to be kind of a blessing in disguise because what we had to do was really focus on, okay, what is it that we're really trying to solve and that we think are the greatest barriers to broad participation in clinical trials? And it turns out there are barriers for lots of different people, regardless of race and ethnicity. And it's the lack of patient centricity, the lack of ease, the burden that the typical way we conduct clinical trials places on most patients. It's the reason why 40% of trials don't meet their enrollment target goals and 60% of patients drop out of trials before they're complete. And this is true of every color of patient. And so if we don't make trials more patient friendly, more welcoming, reaching out to patients that have never been asked or tapped before, then we won't diversify our trials, but we also won't be able to conduct our trials in a timely or price-effective way. And so that really had us back up and deal with the overall barriers to patients, knowing that those barriers, bringing down those barriers will have a disproportionate benefit on the people for whom those barriers have been the highest to begin with. And so our work focuses on working with non-academic medical systems and healthcare systems that tend to have much more representative patient bases than some of our academic medical centers, and federally qualified health centers, which also have very diversified patient bases. And we feel like partnering with sources of diverse patients will help all patients and will get us to more representative trials at the end of the day. But the language has shifted and the ground has shifted. But I think it's an invitation for us all to become even more ambitious than we were at the start of the day.
Absolutely. So, Judy, you started alluding to this, and I feel like all of you have actually touched on this, but what does real commitment to inclusive research look like when DEI isn't the headline? I mean, I wanted to kind of bring out more from the site perspective, authentic leadership and cultural alignment, beyond these labels.
Yeah, I think it's important what Dr. Parker and Dr. McMurray mentioned is these collaborations are extremely important in the communities that we're in. With these collaborations that we can put into place, for example, with physicians, with community organizations, we get that information out there to primarily teach people what clinical trials are, why they're important. You have to start with the basics because nobody's talked to these patients about this. They don't know anything. Maybe they've seen a social media, maybe they remember something from COVID, but they don't really have a positive experience or a thought about it. So then you have to reframe that conversation. So having our community educators, engagement team in the community, attending events, speaking to these people. We, as a research center, are trying to get into all the physician offices to see if we could place our flyers. Could we do lunch and learns with our staff? Could we integrate research into their office to get more of their patients involved? To what extent can we do what we need to do with these providers in our community? Because no one else is doing clinical research in our community. We're one of the few research centers, probably the only one doing psych CNS research in our community, which means none of these providers are talking to their patients about clinical trials unless they're working or collaborating with us, which are very few. So that's something we kind of been working on over the past couple of years. And it's a lot of work because it doesn't involve more than one person. It involves a group of people, and it involves constantly being in these physician offices because they're busy. They're seeing a ton of patients daily. And how do we incorporate what we want them to do into their daily flow when they're already kind of maxed out? How do we make it easier for them other than being an extension of their office, maybe placing our research staff there? And so these are all things we're testing out, and some things are working, some things are not. Then we go back to a drawing board. But I'm very thankful for the current collaborations we have with senior recreation centers where we've hosted events. Thankful for Global Alzheimer's Platform Indiana for their support to continue to be in our community and be an extension of our office to continue to do what we need to do. I'm very thankful for the physicians who allowed us to be in their offices to share information. Many want to tell their patients about research, they just don't have the time. And they also don't have the time to be an investigator, but they're willing to allow us to be in there and do what we need to do. So these are all things, but it's us trying to educate a community of over 200,000 people in our community. So it is a lot of work. And I think the more we can collaborate, the more we can bring on, whether it's local collaborations and external collaborations, will allow us to be more successful, to be able to engage patients, educate them, and then get them involved in research. You have to talk to them. You have to follow up with them, and then maybe one day they will be interested in the research. You can't go just expecting they're going to want to participate in the research study. Let's develop a relationship, let them get to know us, let's get to know them, and then maybe they will participate, or maybe they know someone who will. And word of mouth is very strong in our community. If they had a positive experience in a memory study, they will tell 10, 20 other people, and we've seen that. We've seen that with our memory studies where they bring in 5, 10 neighbors and friends to participate because they just had a really great experience and they loved it. And then now they want everybody else to be part of it. So I think that that goes a long way, but it is an investment in your community. It's a time commitment, but in order for you to do what you need to do, share this message, you do have to invest in the community.
Absolutely. So, Dr. McMurray, I want us to shift to more communication strategies, right? When traditional DEI messaging doesn't connect, what kind of values-based framing tends to resonate more? And how can we help our stakeholders like our sponsors, CROs, or sites, and community partners view diversity as a scientific imperative and not just a social one?
Yeah, this has been a tension that I've thought about for a lot of the last 20 years, which is I think it's time more than and more important than ever to shift from our moral imperative to our business imperative. And I hate to say that, but it is been brutally clear that we need a wider coalition of people fighting for this outcome. We are not enough. And the one thing that goes to the heart of that is aligning your goals with business goals,
Mhm.
particularly for pharmaceutical sponsors. Every day of delay, there was a recent tough study showing that every day of delay of introduction of a new drug is a $40,000 cost for a pharma company. And that can, I'm sure that's a huge range, for some compounds, that's much greater. So every day of delay is a problem. And there are not enough patients in the typical traditional clinical trial recruitment pipelines to populate the number of trials we're doing every year. We're doing over 10,000 clinical trials a year just for pharmaceutical product approvals, and that rate is growing at 10% a year. And so if you get in front of these sponsors and say, look, your goal is to recruit your trial as quickly as possible, complete your trial as quickly as possible, get to market as quickly as possible. And you are not going to achieve those goals without casting a wider net. And we can help you cast that wider net. Then it becomes the number one priority for them and not just the number one priority for you. And I think we need to start speaking those terms. And it's important not just for the pharma company, it's important for the healthcare system overall. 70 to 80% of drug development cost, i.e., the cost that then translates to the high cost of new drugs, are the clinical development investment timelines. So if everything we can do to shrink that is going to make healthcare growth slow, allow our economy to pay for healthcare for a broader swath of people. So these are economic, nationwide growth imperatives, economic competitive imperatives that more people should care about. And in my dream world, everyone would want to do this because it's the right thing to do. But I don't think it hurts us to broaden the coalition and get this to be a burning platform for more people than it is today.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I had to write it down. View this as a business imperative and not just a social one. I mean, that absolutely has resonated with me. But let's talk about trust. You know, a central challenge that remains in Alzheimer's research participation is just that. So, Dr. Parker, how do you and your teams show up authentically beyond recruitment goals to build long-term reciprocal relationships in communities where DEI messaging may not resonate?
Well, we have been conducting a community education-based outreach since 2010, 2012. That's when I started with them. And I'm going to go back to what I said initially. I'd come to research from a primary care perspective. And the patients who are being seen by the doctors here I'm interested in research, but I don't know enough about it. So we conduct an educational research that gives to the community before they commit or even think about research. Because if you don't know enough about it, you can't participate. So we've participated with a number of community serving organizations that include churches, social service advocacy organizations and professional organizations to provide education consistent with what the population wants. This education is, let me put it this way. The way we started was, how can we improve the participation of people of color? In this area geographically, the largest demographic, Metro Atlanta, is 46% African American or Black, however you want to call that. And everybody else follows. So our outreach was targeted initially, those educational programs, to where can we go in the community to engage these people. So consistent with the community advisory committee that was formed, we have conducted educational forums and sessions and brought in different resource vendors to help people understand Alzheimer's and related dementias, what you can do about it, this is the key point, where you can go to get an evaluation, which doctors are available to help you, and if you're not an Emory healthcare patient, where it's taking place in the community. So we went in, and we still do. We go in from the standpoint of giving you some understanding, some education, some tools to understand the research process, what's available, and how you can participate. And we continue with an educational outreach. However, compared to 15 years ago when we started this, instead of working with single local organizations that may have one or two, I'm thinking larger, we're now working with systems that are serving people. So we're focused on healthcare systems and agencies that are providing healthcare services to the demographic reflective of the population. And it is not just African Americans. In some cases, the healthcare organizations that are serving a largely Asian, South Asian population, non-English speaking population that may be Latino. So aside from the African Americans who are underrepresented and Latinos and AAPI communities, part of our research has to extend to areas of the state that are rural, which means anybody in that area is going to be affected regardless of color, because there's not a neurologic service. So we continue with an educational outreach to inform people about what the disease process is, where you can find a provider to get you an evaluation. And if you meet criteria and you're interested, there's an opportunity for you to participate in research. We don't go asking you to participate in research without giving you the resources you need to address the healthcare concern that you have. Since most of our research is now focused on, there are drug intervention trials, but we're looking at trying to keep people healthy. We're looking for people who don't have obvious signs and symptoms of cognitive dysfunction. Starting earlier with getting an earlier diagnosis and evaluation.
Yeah. So, I mean, one of the things that resonates with what you've shared is just the fact that we're approaching this as we need people to have a clear understanding of what is available to them, right? We're not approaching it first with our ask. We're approaching it first with, we need you to know and appreciate what it is that we're bringing to you. Another thing that has stood out to me that I absolutely love is that you all had a task force, that you came together and you truly understood the community that you are in, so that you're able to tailor, the strategies that you use to reach people. I know, what was it? Recently, I went to Atlanta and I noticed that the different languages that the messaging was translated in throughout the airport. I feel like that is a good indication that folks can use to understand some of the emerging populations in their area and start preparing themselves to know, how do we also ensure that they're not left out. So thank you so much for that, Dr. Parker. And so Ms. Galindo, Judy, I would like to come back to you and talk about from some on-the-ground practices that can be done. What specific operational or recruitment strategies have helped your site ensure representation across gender, race, and ethnicity without relying on that formal DEI manner?
Yeah, being in a community with 75% Latinos, we're also a border town into Mexico. And so we do understand that a large percentage of our older patient population are more Spanish speakers versus English speakers. So we do have to ensure that everything we have on site for memory Alzheimer's studies and other studies are in Spanish. And then aside from that, a lot of the social media that we do, the educational content we put out there, is all English and Spanish as well. So depending on the patient population we're targeting, we have to understand who we're targeting. We frame the message correctly so they can understand it, but also make it available in both languages. Also, all of our staff that works at our research center, including Dr. Ng's private clinic, are all bilingual. They're all from the community. They're from Imperial County or even across the border into Mexico. They're very familiar with the patients in our community. So they also understand how to outreach and approach them specifically for certain studies. It also helps to have a full-time community engagement staff member and with the rest of our staff supporting her to be able to be out in the community to ensure that this message and information we have is reaching all the patients out there, especially those who don't necessarily go on social media, right? Or they might not see our flyers out there in the community. So how do we talk to these people in person? How do we give them a flyer in person? Because they might not see the information that we have. So there's different approaches. We have to understand that social media isn't always going to work for everyone, and that we incorporate the different approaches in our community to ensure that we reach all the patients. Also, setting up these relationships, we host memory screenings at the rec centers with Global Alzheimer's Platform and the MRU that we're bringing down. I believe we'll have our third visit next week with the MRU unit, just kind of taking it to different places in the community and getting people to go. We'll do, when they're there at these community events, there's games, there's a game called Loteria that they play. There's prizes that are given to keep the people entertained. So it's like a whole day event from like 9 to 2 p.m. The other thing we do is we do rely on some of our patient advocates, patients who have participated in our studies, who want to share the message. So we're working with a few in the community who are older. Actually, they participate in one of our past memory studies, who know a lot of older patients based on the community they're in, the apartment they're in, or just because they're very involved in the community. So we've worked with them this past year to just share that information and talk to the people they know about our clinical trials, to talk about their experience and to kind of continue to educate them in that way on the people in our community. We also make sure at the site that we're always providing transportation. So transportation should never be a barrier to participating in the study. So we're always covering that, the stipends, ensuring they get a reasonable stipend. We're also providing meals when they do participate. And this is all information we're sharing with participants in our community, that when you participate in a clinical trial, we're going to make it as easy as possible for you to participate and try to eliminate some of those barriers that we have. And so these are some of the things and a lot more that we're doing in our community.
Nice. Yeah, absolutely. And, one thing that I will add, I have started to observe through OrgatNet sites, quite a bit of our site owners, similar to you, are becoming more intentional about the locations that they are selecting for establishing research sites. I think that is always key, looking for areas that truly need the resources that clinical research can bring to them. So it's that multi-pronged approach of, yes, we're ensuring that we're getting out there and we're providing the education. But the next step is them getting better access to those resources, and starting to establish research sites in some of these communities is also a really good step towards that. But I'm coming back to you, Dr. Parker. I want us to talk a little bit about some practical steps. I wanted to share, what can sites or academic partners do to make inclusion part of everyday operations, whether it be from study design or staff training? What can we do to make sure that this becomes a part of our research DNA and not be considered a separate initiative?
I think what I do with research outreach is I try to address any individual. And I think that you said centers, okay? We're based in an academic site, and that's a little different from a commercial research site and center. That's a whole different research education process. Okay, so sending somebody to a commercial site, and I've been there because I'm motivated to do so. I'm not so sure anybody else would be, but I also have an exposure to research, so I understand it better. But I think that if the idea is to educate the entire community and make the entire community aware, particularly those providers who are providing services to people in whatever community it is you are in, and include the providers, make a special effort to partner with the medical providers who are seeing those patients and give them the tools they need to help refer people into you. I mean, I've been, Atlanta's a little different. You have academic centers. We have several different universities that are conducting research, but you also have freestanding, I don't want to use the word, but for-profit entities that provide an access point for some research. And having been in those places, there's nothing engaging or particularly fun about them. They're centers where they're designed to come collect your specimen and you get up and get out. So my thought would be make sure that the educational focus you have is including providers. And when I say providers, not just medical providers, but pharmacists, where people are receiving their care. Dr. McMurray talked about federally funded community health centers. Now, I'm going to be real honest here, and somebody's not going to like what I'm about to say, but if the idea is business and you're trying to get people engaged in research and you're trying to sell a product, if the product isn't available to the people because they don't have insurance to pay for it, that's not a population they're interested in. We want the biospecimens, but you people can't afford the drugs, so why bother? That's sometimes the attitude. So I really do think that you need to educate the community, not just the population, but you have to educate the providers that are serving the population and the systems. And I do want to emphasize systems, the healthcare systems that are serving the population, and approach it from this is a way to improve health, a health improvement perspective, rather than just a get perspective. You have to inform, you have to engage all of them in a process that makes sense for them.
Absolutely. Oh my gosh. I'm moderating and I'm taking notes. But Dr. McMurray, my next question is for you, and it's one that I'm really interested in. When we remove the DEI label, how do we still measure and hold ourselves accountable for equitable outcomes?
Yeah, I think that's probably the most important question, right? Because what you don't measure won't improve, right? And it's very, very difficult for us to get clear barometers of how we're doing if we can't see which trials are meeting their inclusion criteria and which aren't. And one of the things that saddens me more than most things these days is that we've lost the FDA guidance on diversity action plans and inclusive clinical trials, at least for now, because I think that guidance really kind of shone a light on industry-sponsored trials, at least, to say you do need a pathway to inclusive trials, and we are going to hold you accountable at the end of the day. I think it's going to become imperative that those of us who are advocates spend more and more of our time, or a larger percentage of our time, on this question, on trying to get the data. And it's not going to be easy to get. It's not easy to get today. It's not easy to get when 4 years ago. It's going to continue to get more tough. So we have to do everything we can when we can see it to shine a light on it and say what can be done better. I do think it's interesting, there's the question of how we make sure that pharmaceuticals are affordable to the patients that we're doing outreach for trials that they're in. And that's incredibly important and something I very much been committed to for a long time. And to me, it goes back to making R&D less than $2.5 billion for every new introduced drug. And if 70% of that cost is coming from the time it takes and the complexity involved in conducting a clinical trial, then if we can make trials faster and more efficient, we can go a long way to bringing down those costs and making them costs that can be more easily covered by our insurers as well. So there are a lot of, the fingers can be pointed all around. But it also means that there's a giant opportunity to have an impact. And it's so important for us to do. And, I actually had a question for Judy too. I was so impressed by the activities you were doing. And I was thinking, one of the things we can't talk about these days is DEI, but one of the other things that's really impacting patients of color is immigration status and being in a border town. I'm wondering how that's impacted your efforts to have inclusive trials. Sorry to take us a little bit.
No, absolutely. I love this. Judy,
Yeah,
are
that
you able
Yeah,
to
I
speak?
can answer it. That's a really good question, and I feel like it's still too early to tell. We still have patients that are participating. It's very common for border towns like ours and in other cities where people go back and forth. So people might work in the US, they might live across border because their family is there, other reasons. They go back and forth, they have legal status, they might be residents of the US or residents of Mexico, but you can still legally go back and forth. And that's what they do. It's always been that way. And so we're aware of that, and we just have to be cautious. What patients are realistically going to be able to participate, who will be able to continue in the study based on everything that's going on. But if they still continue to go back and forth, that hasn't really affected what they're doing across the border. And so I know there's been a lot of things going on in these communities with the rate, so that we're very cautious of that. And if we are always on stand, if we need to change our approach, what we're doing, especially with the MRU unit or these events that we're hosting. But so far, we haven't seen too much change yet in our community with that.
That's great to hear.
Yeah. And, Dr. Parker just shared as well that, one of the things that we can do is kind of let's look at the communities that we're in and try to just ensure that participation in our trials is a reflection of those communities, you know. But I would like to know, let's don't throw the problem. It's not just what are sites doing to enroll or recruit folks for trials or educate the community. What role do sponsors, CROs, or organizations like GAP play in helping sites sustain inclusive practices over time? Judy, could you start off?
Yeah, so I think it's very important. I think exactly what GAP is doing with sponsored CROs is a role model and should be, others should follow in return, because I think that support that you guys are providing for the studies that we are working on is going to help further these community engagement, getting the information out to the right people. We also need to make sure that sponsored CROs are placing their studies in these communities where the patients exist, because that's not occurring still to this day. Like I mentioned, we're in the psych CNS space and expanding into multi-specialty research centers. I still am having trouble getting a lot of these other therapeutic studies to my community. I don't know why when I have a large Latino community. And that's the same thing that's happening across a lot of other communities. So we need to make sure that the sponsors are doing that. And with that, it will further that and we'll make sure that all these patients will participate. And I actually went to a meeting recently where I read a stats from a sponsor that stated only 5% of diverse patients or minority patients participated in their clinical trials. And so I went back to them and was like, because you're not placing these trials where they need to go, so you're going to continue to get this 5% across the board, right? US, international. I think the other thing they need to do is ensure, depending like in our community, in our case, that we need Spanish materials, that we have the Spanish materials we need when our site is activated. Because even then, now to this point, we have a delay in getting these materials. And when we have that delay, that means there's a delay in screening and enrolling patients for these very important studies. Sometimes we can go 3 to 4 or 5 months where we don't have the materials. So in a sense, the study's on hold when 90% of our patients are Spanish speakers in an Alzheimer's study. And so I think that's very important. The other thing I think is definitely the sponsor CROs need to do more with sites when it comes to engaging the community. Some of them might have a community engagement representative or something to that effect, that role. They're not really doing much with sites. So if they're going to take on that role and they want to ensure that sites can recruit the patients that they need to in their sites, then they need to collaborate better with sites. And that's really not happening too much yet, except for a few. So I think we need to change that, and we need to change the way we're doing things. We need to think outside the box, and we need to stop doing things the same way we're doing. If not, we're not going to recruit the patients that we need to, especially in these diverse communities.
Well said, well said. And here at GAP, we are here to be your thought partners, and we're also here to be your advocate. But I would also love to hear Dr. Parker's opinion on this.
One of the things that consistent with what Judy just mentioned, she talked about we need materials in Spanish language. Why don't you hire coordinators and promoters who are part of the research process that are language and culturally congruent? I keep hearing, oh, we want everybody. This is the thing that I get in academia. We want everybody. We want all groups. We want all languages. We want all ethnicities, but we don't hire and make language congruent materials. We don't put hire study coordinators or empower clinicians who can be clinician scientists who may be culturally and ethnically and gender congruent to the population targeted to convey the information. So I think that it's not, quite frankly, enough just to pass out information in a language, whether it's Spanish, or I did a health screen a couple of months ago in Vietnamese, Korean, Chinese. I mean, I almost wanted to stop being there, because if it wasn't for the doctors who could speak Korean, who could speak Spanish, or could speak Chinese, because that was the group that I was with, it would have been a disaster. So I think that if you're really serious about engaging all aspects or all parts of the community, we have to have people in place, not just nominal roles, but in key roles for communicating and educating the population. And I think that taking research out of academic medical centers and doing it in a real space. 20 years ago, I was in private practice and I was a site for a study. It makes sense to me that you would partner with a healthcare provider who can do the research where the people are coming. Most of the research sites that are non-academic are located in a warehouse park somewhere. That's usually, if you're in a metropolitan area, that is not available to most public transportation and presents a challenge for people to get there. But beyond getting there, you have to be able to communicate with the people that you're interested in reaching.
Absolutely.
You should be partnering with the providers that are providing the medical care to that population in their language, in their neighborhood, where it's convenient.
No, absolutely. So
that's what we try to do.
Oh, sorry.
That's all. That's my comment. That's what I try to do.
Yeah. So we're just a couple of minutes away from time, and I want to thank you all for your insight and your authenticity. I think today's discussion has reminded us that inclusive research isn't just a label. It's about sustained commitment, trust, and science that truly reflects our community. So Dr. McMurray, do you have any final words for us as we close out?
Well, I'll just, on the theme of being more ambitious than we have been, We often go for the goal of having the level of representation in a clinical trial that is present in the population without asking ourselves, is that a large enough number of patients to have statistical significant results at the end of the day? Because it's more than just about getting patients of varying complexions into a trial. It's having a large enough number of each one of those groups to be able to tell if the medicine we're testing is going to be safe and effective for each one of those groups. And sometimes that's going to take over-representation to get the number that we really need. So don't just stop at the 15% or whatever percentage goal you think is reflective of the general population. Stop at the level that is going to give us the scientific solution to the question we're trying to ask.
Absolutely. All right. Well, ladies, thank you so very much. All right. And I hope for all of you joining us, I hope you enjoyed the conversation and I hope you're able to take something away. Always remembering that this is something that we are committed to. This isn't just labels. We're not talking about buzzwords. We are talking about truly creating health equity. All right. All right. I'm handing back over to Taylor.